Welcome back to Transcriber from Reddit. Today's topic comes from the subreddit exLutheran, posted by user Don't Eat the Cookies Mom. This post was posted over a year ago. Originally, I was going to transcribe this and post this around graduation. However, in honor of the school year about to begin, I decided to record and post this now. This has to do with Fox Valley Lutheran, a high school located in Appleton, Wisconsin. The post is a text post titled, "WELS, a cult happy to accept public funds to practice fear and hate." The text below is a link to Channel 3000. Overall, this Channel 3000 article, which is sourced from WisconsinWatch.org, has the same title, has the same verbiage, pretty much is a copy-paste of that article. That article covers the fact that Wisconsin taxpayers fund with their tax dollars a program that gives vouchers and allows vouchers to be used at private schools. Today I will transcribe for you the channel3000.com article titled "False Choice. Wisconsin Taxpayers Support Schools That Can Discriminate." Underneath the title, it reads, "Dozens of voucher schools have policies that allow them to exclude LGBTQ+ students or those with disabilities. In many cases, it's legal." It was written by Phoebe Petrovic, Wisconsin Watch, on May 5th, 2023. Below that is an image. At one end is a bright blue school with a mom and a dad standing in front of it, holding hands. On either side of the school, we see a ticket image with the word voucher written on it. And where you would tear off the ticket has the $sign. Further away from the school, closer to us in the picture, we see two children looking at stacks of books. Below the image is a caption that reads, "Taxpayer-funded vouchers make eligible families better able to afford a private school education, but students who are LGBTQ+ or have disabilities lose rights they would have in the public school system." Parentheses, Amina Saleh, Wisconsin Watch, end parentheses. Underneath that, in italics, is the following words. "This story was originally published by Wisconsin Watch," linked here, end italics. I begin reading the article. In 2022, the two Fox Valley Lutheran high school students were a few months from graduating when they got called into the dean's office. One was the cheerleading captain and National Honor Society inductee, the other a basketball player, homecoming queen, and student council member. Both were accomplished and well-respected students. Yet in separate meetings with the dean, they learned they faced expulsion, not for cheating or plagiarizing or breaking the law, but because administrators suspected the young women of dating. The school's handbook, linked here, states that, quote, "any sexual misconduct," end quote, including, quote, "homosexual behavior, ... on or off campus, will be treated as a serious violation of God's will and may be grounds for disciplinary action or expulsion," end quote. State law prohibits public schools from discriminating against students on the basis of sex, sexual orientation, or disability, but it does not extend the same protections to private schools, even those receiving public funds. Fox Valley Lutheran in Appleton is one of 373 of Wisconsin private schools that currently receive public funding through tuition vouchers. According to this year's preliminary numbers, they serve more than 52,000 voucher students, linked here, which amounts to 6% of all students at Wisconsin publicly funded schools. About 1/5 of voucher schools have 90% or more of their students on vouchers, what one scholar describes as, quote, private in name only, end quote. Wisconsin spent about $443 million this year on the four-choice programs, linked here. Some Republicans, including 2022 gubernatorial candidate Tim Michels, have pushed for, quote, universal, end quote, school choice, which would allow any Wisconsin student, regardless of income, to attend a private school at taxpayer expense. The cheerleading captain, who spoke to Wisconsin Watch on the condition of anonymity to avoid harassment, recalled the dean saying he'd go easy on them because they were good students. The pair could remain enrolled and graduate, so long as they broke up and spoke with a pastor, and after he outed them to their parents. Leaders from Fox Valley Lutheran did not respond to a request for a comment. Leaders from Fox Valley Lutheran did not respond to a request for comment on this account. The next day, dozens of seniors quietly protested the decision by wearing their school-issued class t-shirts, which were tie-dyed rainbow. The next week, the young woman found herself meeting with the principal, athletic director, and her parents, which she suspected was, quote, retaliation after the whole rainbow shirt thing, end quote. Below that, we see an image of one of the main entrances of Fox Valley Lutheran High School. It has the letter D on it, and we see graduating students in maroon and silver, maroon for boys and silver for females, respectively. We see smiles on everyone's faces as they graduate. I continue reading. The principal, Alan Nolte, began with a prayer that asked the, quote, Heavenly Father, end quote, to bless the meeting as they, quote, help to build, parentheses, the student, and parentheses, up, end quote, according to a recording of the meeting. Nolte then proceeded to ban her from any extracurriculars or school activities that were, quote, a little bit more public in nature, end quote, for the rest of the year. He said the relationship was a sin because, quote, the Bible is clear, end quote, but that the administration was treating it as any other code of conduct violation. Quote, our chief concern, end quote, Nolte said, quote, is your spiritual welfare, end quote. In an interview, the student said she did not mind a religious school instructing a student to meet with a pastor, but she objected to a taxpayer-funded school meting out punishment based on, quote, moral issues, end quote. Side note, that is extremely offensive that would happen to a student who is attending the school because it's receiving taxpayer-funded money, and that they can just change her punishment because, unfortunately, for her, and simultaneously, fortunately for her, she got so much public backing from the student body. I can only imagine how terrified the administration was and hoped that by threatening her entire rest of her career, could they hope to keep her silent. Section, quote, little can be done, end quote. The cheerleading captain didn't know it, but another student had reached out on her and her girlfriend's behalf, asking Governor Tony Evers for help. Quote, this week 2 fantastic athletes, parentheses, redacted, and parentheses, redacted, and parentheses, were banned from all team sports for being in a homosexual relationship, end quote, the student wrote in an online complaint. Quote, the entire student body is very upset about this, as this could affect, parentheses, their, in parentheses, careers in sports when it should not, end quote. The student said, quote, this is discrimination, and I believe it should be addressed on a government level as the student receives funding from school choice, end quote. In an email to Wisconsin Watch, Fox Valley Lutheran's president said the, quote, details, end quote, of the complaint were, quote, not accurate, end quote, but he declined to say how. Records show Evers' staff sought guidance from the State Department of Public Instruction on how to respond, but acknowledged that, quote, likely little can be done as it is a private institution, end quote. In response to questions from Evers' staff, DPI said it lacked, quote, apparent authority, end quote, to intervene on behalf of the student athletes. It recommended the concerned student contact the school's governing board or advocacy groups who might connect them with attorneys. The first governor to raise the LGBTQ plus flag over Wisconsin's Capitol could not help the gay students. The young women pretended to break up and laid low until graduation. They're still dating today. Side note, congratulations to the two young women here for making it through, graduating, and still being together. That being said, I can see why DPI and Evers would have the responses that they did, because likely this has something to do with religious freedom as well as separation of church and state. I continue reading. Section, quote, choice, end quote, for some, not all. Wisconsin is considered the birthplace of the, quote, school choice, end quote, movement. The nation's first publicly funded private voucher program began in Milwaukee in 1990. Initial restrictions, such as limiting vouchers to secular schools, have disappeared as the program has expanded. Today, 32 schools, including at least one with an anti-LGBTQ+ stance, have their entire student bodies on publicly funded vouchers. Legal discrimination against students who are LGBTQ+ or have disabilities results from a lack of state-level protections. A federal exemption, linked here, that allows religious entities to discriminate against LGBTQ+ students, and another that requires schools taking federal funds to make only minor adjustments for students with disabilities, and a state education agency constrained by punctilious rules and decades of litigation. Quote, it's unfortunate, DPI Communications Director Abigail Swetz told Wisconsin Watch by email. Quote, we want children to be included, welcomed, and safe in all schools, especially those that receive public funding. It is what we expect as good stewards of public dollars and as educators who value all children, end quote. Wisconsin Watch reviewed public materials for about 1/3 of the state's voucher schools and found that nearly half had policies or statements that appeared to discriminate against students who are LGBTQ+ or have disabilities, often citing religious principles or lack of capacity to accommodate certain conditions. Some handbooks say administrators may decline to enroll students with disabilities whose needs they cannot meet. Others say they might refuse enrollment to students whose families support LGBTQ+ people. Some, like Fox Valley Lutheran, might expel students who engage in, quote, homosexual behavior, end quote, off campus. One will even expel students if their parents' conduct is, quote, contrary to the Bible, end quote. Quote, let's just stop calling it a, quote, choice program, end quote, end overall quote, said Jeffrey Spitzer-Resnick, a civil rights attorney and disability education advocate. Quote, and let's call it a private discriminatory education program funded with your tax dollars, end quote. The president of School Choice Wisconsin, Nicholas Kelly, said by email that his organization, quote, supports and encourages compliance with all rules and processes set in place to address issues of this nature, end quote. He did not respond to specific questions, including whether private schools that discriminate should receive public funds. Please note that the words supports and encourages have the S in parentheses. I continue reading. Several other organizations that support voucher schools ignored repeated requests for comment. Every voucher school contacted ignored or declined an interview to clarify its positions, as did every association, church, or accreditor representing them. Some provided brief written statements, 2 hung up on calls, and 1 blocked a reporter's emails. In records obtained from DPI, a Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod pastor said he believes, quote, that lifestyles and that lifestyles and current viewpoints of LGBTQ individuals clearly oppose the teachings of Scripture and therefore constitute sin that must be addressed. ... Within our circles, we would say that, quote, this is not discrimination, but rather love practiced in the same way a parent would raise a child and announce harm when it is near. End quote. End overall quote. Legal scholars and advocates for the LGBTQ+ and disability communities all objected to public dollars supporting institutions with such policies. Quote, I think it's a common sense approach, and that the general public would typically agree that a school that receives taxpayer money shouldn't be able to discriminate against certain historically marginalized students, end quote, said Suzanne X., an education law professor at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Quote, LGBTQ folks are members of the community. We're taxpayers, end quote, said Ali Muldrow, a Madison School Board member and co-executive director of GSAFE, which advocates on behalf of LGBTQ+ youth in education. Quote, we shouldn't have to contribute to entities and institutions that discriminate against us, end quote. Section, quote, am I allowed to expel a student who comes out of the closet, end quote. Wisconsin lawmakers have declined at least 3 times to stop voucher schools from discriminating against LGBTQ+ students or those with disabilities. Proposals in 2007, 2013, and 2015 all died without public hearings. Leaders of the education committees in both chambers did not respond to emails from Wisconsin Watch asking if they condone the status quo. Establishment of all 4 of the state's voucher programs, the Milwaukee, Racine, and statewide Wisconsin Parental Choice programs, and the Special Needs Scholarship Program, was tucked into larger budget bills and signed by Republican governors Tommy Thompson and Scott Walker. State law requires voucher schools to comply with a federal code prohibiting discrimination based on race, color, or national origin, but no other protected classes. And while they cannot discriminate against LGBTQ+ students or those with disabilities during admissions, limited by statutorily described eligibility criteria linked here, they may do so once that student is enrolled. Note to the right of these paragraphs is a grayscale photo of a church. Written in front on the roadside says Lutheran Church, Keel Hills. Excuse me, instead, it's not Hills, it's Kiel, Wisconsin. I continue reading. It is even legal for a private school to enroll a voucher student, quote, 1 minute, end quote, and expel them, quote, the next, end quote, confirmed Sweats. Over the years, records show faith leaders considering joining the voucher program have inquired about this distinction in blunt terms. The Reverend Brett Nauman, pastor of Trinity Lutheran Church in Kiel, asked if he could expel a student who came out as gay or transgender, quote, provided that it is clearly laid out in our handbook, end quote. A DPI consultant responded, quote, once a student has been offered a seat and the student accepts, school policies apply, end quote. Side note, that makes sense, considering that you have been offered and that you accept that offer. Similar to a job. There are certain rules and guidelines that you have to abide by. In this case, the question is, if a guideline means that your sexuality is at stake, or rather, your ability to graduate and go on to a college of your choice is at stake because of your sexuality, if that is legal, if that is lawful. I continue reading. Nauman's school is not currently a member of the voucher program, and he referred all questions to the Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod, parentheses, WELS, end parentheses, linked here, whose spokesperson, Lee Hitter, did not answer specific questions. He provided a statement that said, in part, quote, we operate our schools in accordance with all state and federal laws, ... Prospective families can determine if the mission and beliefs of WELS schools meet the needs of their families and whether to enroll their children, end quote. WELS considers it a sin to be transgender or gay. Wisconsin Watch found 17 WELS schools participating in the voucher program with anti-LGBTQ+ policies. Section. Enrollment required, expulsion okay. DPI's authority to protect students who are LGBTQ+ or have disabilities at voucher schools stops at enrollment. Take Fond du Lac Christian School, linked here. The school sought to join the voucher program in 2017, submitting materials indicating it would deny enrollment to voucher students who were gay or transgender. A DPI consultant directed the school to change the policy and resubmit it, as it could only base voucher admissions on family income, prior year enrollment, prior attendance at a voucher school, residency, and age. Below that is a picture of a long, I think ranch-style, single-story, but extended, long-form building, gray with the lettering at the front entrance that says FDL Christian School. I continue reading. The official complied, adding a disclaimer that exempted voucher students from this anti-LGBTQ+ admissions requirement while maintaining it for privately paying students, a distinction Wisconsin Watch found elsewhere. As permitted by law, Fond du Lac Christian School kept in its 2017 to 2018 handbook, linked here, an 8-point anti-LGBTQ+ policy against enrolled students, as well as parents, employees, and members, which bans them from, quote, practicing, end quote, their gay or transgender identities. Today, about 63% of Fond du Lac Christian School's students are on vouchers. The current handbook is not publicly available, and school administrator Luke Wagner and other staff blocked a reporter from emailing them after asking for the policy. A receptionist hung up on the same reporter when inquiring by phone. Section A, quote, cautious, end quote, DPI. DPI risks a lawsuit if its response to claims of discrimination appears to overstep its authority as explicitly described in statute, and a lawsuit, DPI's sweats said by email, could create, quote, bad law, parentheses, court precedent, end parentheses, that would further harm kids, end quote. DPI also can't establish rules granting itself additional authority without agreement from the Republican-controlled legislature. In the 1990s, at the beginning of the state's first voucher program, then State Superintendent of Public Instruction Bert Grover crafted a rule requiring participating private schools to serve students with disabilities similarly to public schools, but it was short-lived, with a judge deciding Grover lacked the authority to establish such a rule. And even after the U.S. Department of Justice ordered DPI in 2013 to end discrimination based on disability in its voucher school program, linked here, the agency said it lacked the specific statutory authority to act. Quote, there is this long-standing pattern in the space of courts and the legislature of looking for ways to limit DPI's authority, end quote, said Elizabeth Lambert, attorney and founder of the Wisconsin Education Law and Policy Hub. Quote, all DPI is in parentheses, can do is apply these very specific procedural mandates that are written into the statute, and there's no authority outside that, end quote. This history has made DPI, in Lambert's view, quote, cautious, end quote, and, quote, defensive, end quote. Spitzer-Resnick, the other education attorney, has a blunter description, quote, completely wimpy, end quote. Quote, we have to be cautious, Sweat said. Quote, when it comes to the private school choice programs, we so much as sneeze and we get sued, and then more kids get hurt, end quote. Section, quote, we operate under what is written in state statutes, end quote. DPI declined to weigh in even when presented with possible violations of state law uncovered by Wisconsin Watch. Faith Christian School in Williams Bay, which has 17% of its student body on vouchers, requires all families to undergo the school's admissions process, including providing a, quote, Christian testimony, end quote, from one parent, a student/family interview, and agreement with the school's anti-LGBTQ+ and anti-abortion statement of faith, all linked here. Below that, we see a photo of a long tan building that has outside of it a sign that reads Faith Christian School. I continue reading. State law does not permit private schools to place these additional requirements on voucher students prior to enrollment. Faith Christian School also vows to leave the voucher program if the state dictates it cannot make enrollment or admissions decisions, quote, based solely on a student's views or behavior related to ... homosexuality, gender, and sexual identity, including the student's own gender identification, end quote. State law already prohibits that. Peace Lutheran School in Hartford has a similar application process to Faith Christian, requiring parents to, quote, permit their child to be instructed in the doctrines of Holy Scripture, end quote, as taught by the Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod, including, quote, biblical truths, end quote, about, quote, homosexuality, same-sex marriage, evolution, premarital sex, drug abuse, and the like, end quote. Linked here. State law specifically requires voucher schools to honor a voucher family's request to opt out of religious activities and instruction. Linked here. Sweats, DPI's communications director, said whether Faith Christian's approach or similar approaches violate state law comes down to timing. Quote, if these policies are applied as part of reviewing the student's choice eligibility and before the random selection process for the program, then it would be considered a violation, end quote, she said by email. But if it came after the random lottery, it was fine. Added Sweats, quote, Wisconsin DPI cannot weigh in on whether certain schools' policies are legal or illegal because we operate under what is written in state statutes, end quote. Faith Christian School did not respond to emails or phone messages, but a spokesperson for Association of Christian Schools International, which provides its accreditation, said, quote, it is not discrimination for Christian schools to teach and live out the truths of the historic Christian faith with respect to marriage and human sexuality, end quote. Section: Federal Disability Protections Limited. Federal law ostensibly provides protections to students with disabilities, but various exemptions limit the effect. Education legal scholars, lawyers, and disability rights activists say that ultimately, when students with disabilities opt out of public school, they waive their most robust protections to an equal education. Religious schools, nearly all of those receiving Wisconsin vouchers, are exempt from federal laws barring discrimination based on disability unless they take federal funds. And even then, the law requires only, quote, minor adjustments, end quote. Fond du Lac Christian School, for example, states it, quote, desires to serve, end quote, those it is, quote, equipped to accommodate, end quote, but, quote, is not qualified to adequately address all learning disabilities, behavioral disorders, or emotional disturbances, end quote. Like Prairie Hill Waldorf School, it reserves the right to expel students if it determines the school cannot meet their needs. Joanne Yunke, an advocacy specialist at Disability Rights Wisconsin, said her organization, quote, fairly regularly, end quote, receives calls from parents asking, quote, oh my goodness, can they actually do this, end quote. Even parents who enrolled their children on special needs scholarship program vouchers, which lists the rights of students with disabilities in the program compared to public schools, can feel blindsided. Linked here. Quote, if you have any memory left of that plain black and white document that said you've given up some of your rights, it can still come as a surprise to you, end quote, Yunke said. Section: How Title IX Protects Religious Freedom, Allows LGBTQ plus Discrimination. When it comes to LGBTQ plus protections, private religious institutions that receive federal funding are exempt from Title IX, linked here, the federal law barring gender-based discrimination in education if complying with the law would violate a school's religious tenets. This year, 95% of the state's voucher schools are religious, Wisconsin Watch found. Emmanuel Lutheran School of Brookfield, which has 71% of its students on vouchers, embodies the exemption. Its handbook, linked here, tells families that to receive federally subsidized free and reduced lunch, it must display a poster professing it does not discriminate on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. But alongside what they call the, quote, offending poster, end quote, is one reaffirming the reaffirming the school's Christian beliefs that it is a sin to be gay or trans. Elsewhere, the school's handbook warns that pupils should not, quote, intentionally present their physical features or dress to be opposite his/her sex at conception, end quote. Below that is a screenshot of some text that reads as follows. That is from the handbook. Recently, the USDA issued new national school lunch requirements that include the display of a poster indicating our agreement with gender/identity beliefs that are counter to a Christian worldview. This is currently being challenged in court. However, we are still required to display the poster. Emmanuel's response below is also posted with the offending poster. Emmanuel Lutheran Church, School and Childcare is a LCMS Lutheran organization that believes and teaches that God's plan for humanity is to make human beings as male or female, that the two distinct genders are each genetically unique and irreplaceable in God's plan. Parentheses, Genesis 1, verses 26 through 27, end parentheses. God's plan is for genetically made men and women to marry and create children, thus forming the family, which is God's first church. No effort to feed hungry people through secularly funded programs changes God's commands or our obedience to that plan or to the teaching of that plan. Parentheses, 1 Corinthians 6, verses 9 through 10, end parentheses. This ends the screenshot. Below the words, we see on the right a page number, page 10, and below on the left, we see the words revised 12/12/2022. I continue reading the article. The basis of a religious exemption to non-discrimination laws has a fraught history. Scholars Suzanne X. and Julie Mead write, linked here, that in the mid-20th century, segregationists attempted to use the theory of, quote, sincerely held religious beliefs, end quote, to justify exclusion of black students. In 1983, the Supreme Court determined private religious schools cannot justify discrimination through faith and still claim public benefits, such as an IRS tax exemption. Today, X and Mead believe the question has moved to LGBTQ+ students. There's a potential for litigation challenging Title IX's religious exemption to LGBTQ+ discrimination, quote, in the same way that we saw in the 50s, 60s, all the way up through the early 80s of African American students who weren't being admitted to private schools, end quote, X said. Mead argues that despite the various obstacles DPI faces, Wisconsin has a legal obligation to prevent discrimination within the voucher programs because they are public, state-administered programs. Mead and X have proposed passing state and federal laws prohibiting private schools taking public funds from discriminating against students who are LGBTQ+ or have disabilities. But how that might stand against Title IX's religious exemption is unclear. As of 2021, Maryland was the nation's only state to ban discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity in voucher schools. It is currently defending its position in court. Here ends the article. Below that reads in italics, the nonprofit Wisconsin Watch, parentheses, www.wisconsinwatch.org, end parentheses, collaborates with WPR, PBS Wisconsin, other news media, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Journalism and Mass Communication. All works created, published, posted, or disseminated by Wisconsin Watch do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of UW-Madison or any of its affiliates. Now underneath that, I know it says copyright 2023 by Channel 3000. However, because I am using this in a creative context and in order to again publicize FVL's wrongdoing, which is part of the purpose of my channel, this is Creative Commons and falls under the creative exemption. Burning skies now overcast. I can choose to be better and less. Leave the hurt behind, tearing the threads of the tethers. Leave the